This is the Nobel Podcast, where we talk about how to optimize your technology, life, and mind. We're joined by special operations veterans, entrepreneurs, investors, and others who have overcome difficulty to make it to the top of their craft by staying in the fight. Welcome to the Nobel Podcast. I'm Sam Alaimo, and I'm joined with John Stryker Meyer, SOG legend, author, and host of the SOGcast podcast. John, welcome.
Thank you, Sam. Good to be here.
Let's start where we always do. Where did you grow up?
Well, Trenton, New Jersey, just a few miles north of your AO there in Philadelphia. And my dad was a milkman. Mom was a piano teacher and a choir director and a church organist. And so I had music and grew up in a milk truck with Dad. And then graduated from high school at 64. And that was the same year that Roger Donlin earned the first Medal of Honor in the Vietnam War. And in history classes, we had read about Southeast Asia, and Vietnam was beginning to get more headlines. This is back when David Halberstam and some of his cohorts were doing some excellent reporting from Vietnam. So in 64, I graduated. Roger Donlin earned the Medal of Honor the following month. Took me 2 years to flunk out of college at Trenton State College. When I flunked out, I was working in Yosemite National Park. And I read the book, The Green Berets. And my dad told me, he says, you know, the draft board's coming. I read the book. I said, well, you know what? These guys, they sound crazy. This, if I could qualify for them, I'd rather go to Vietnam with these guys. Went down, talked to the recruiter. And back then, you just enlisted for airborne unassigned. And so after basic training, which was 8 weeks at Fort Dix, we were down at Fort Gordon, Georgia. And about the third or fourth week through, they have one of these career days. Like it's always a rainy day. And you go into a big gym or an auditorium. Everybody's sitting on the floor, like 500-600 guys. And it had a stage up front with staircases on it on each side. And the cooks would come up, the combo guys, the military police. And like the cooks said, this is the best job. You'll never be hungry. And they're all fat slobs, right? And so the very last guy to come in was a Green Beret, and it was raining because we were inside because it was raining. And this Green Beret came in, some little banty rooster of a guy, no rain jacket. His fatigues were wet because he obviously walked in the rain. He walked up to the stage, did a vertical jump up on the stage, turned around and said, I'm the Special Forces recruiter. If you're interested, how many are interested? Well, I read the book. I jumped up off the floor, me about 500 or 600 other guys. And everybody else was just sitting there going like, you guys are crazy. After AIT, you're going to Vietnam. I'm a city slicker. I need a lot more training. So then we went through the test. And at the end of it, the recruiter told me, Meyer, you're lucky. We've lowered the standards. So then from that, jump school, training group for 7 months. And then we had TDY for the radio teletype training, which was early 68, landed in Nam at the end of April 68, had the in-country training. And they told us some of our, once we were in these classes and with the special forces, we had guys that had been in Nam 2 or 3 times already. And all of them said, when you go to Vietnam, go to an A camp, learn how the country works. And at the end of your in-country training, some guy's going to come out and say, we need volunteers. Don't do it. They all die. So sure enough, we're in-country. We did the 3 weeks of in-country training. At the end, here comes this little guy out. We're looking for volunteers. And so my buddy, Johnny McIntyre, goes, for what? He goes, can't say. Either you're in or you're not. Well, we all volunteered. And next day we were in Da Nang. We got the top secret briefing in the room with the curtains on the windows and the curtain over this map. And we had been students for over a year. And so we're pulling our pads and pens out. And the sergeant major goes, put that shit away. This is a top secret briefing. And it says, in front of you is an NDA. You can sign it or leave. So we all signed it. Then we got the briefing. There's the map. Vietnam, I Corps, 2 Corps, 3 Corps, 4 Corps. On the left was Laos and Cambodia, all in 6x6 target boxes. And welcome to the secret war. Dan went on to explain it. And then Johnny Mac and I, after the briefing, we flew up on South Vietnamese Air Force H-34 King Bees. The code name was King Bees. And that was like culture shock because we had all these American helicopters. We didn't even know what a CH-34 was, let alone have it flown by some South Vietnamese guy. Well, it turned out those guys were really outstanding. But we flew up, get off the helicopter, and a recon team gets on and disappears. It was Spike Team Idaho, and that was our introduction to the Secret War. And so there's an instant opening on recon, and we're just very fortunate. Spider Parks had been on the team, had gotten promoted to his own team, and Hep, the interpreter, didn't go. He was sick. And the team leader, the Vietnamese team leader, it was not his rotation. They rotated on missions. So Hep and Sal stayed back at the base. After the team got wiped out, Spider became the team leader, and we rebuilt it around Hep and Sal. Hired 3 new 15-year-olds, and I had myself, green as grass, and Don Wolken. And that was the beginning of the entrance to the Secret War.
I want to back up and then come back to this point. Were you
Sure.
going to enlist in the military anyway, or did the draft make the military an option for you?
Oh, well, I knew they were coming. And with the draft, I wasn't sure how it was going to plan out, but I wanted to enlist because the recruiter said that you enlist for airborne unassigned, and when you're in AIT, you'll get the option to volunteer there. You'll have a moment in time. And I was surprised. They came through, we did it, and that's when we volunteered there, went through all the tests and everything else, written, physical, swimming, whatnot.
It's interesting. So you knew what was happening in the Vietnam War at the time. Was it unpopular then when you enlisted?
There was growing dissent
Mm.
in the country, and I enlisted in December of '66. So on the college campus where I'd been, there was like some of what I would call, I guess, the left, or some are a little bit more flaky people, the marijuana smokers. They were beginning to be anti-war, which I didn't really understand it much, other than we had the communists up north that wanted to subvert people down south. That was all I knew about it. By '66 and into '67, we're learning about we had the Ai Drang Valley in '65. There were a couple 8 camps that were historic. And then, of course, in '68, when we were going through our special training for radio teletype, they had the Tet Offensive. And Johnny Mack and I were up in a bar in Washington, D.C., like January or February 1st of '68. Here on TV, like CBS, they had film of an NVA tank in Lang Vay, the uppermost A camp in Vietnam, A-101. And the tank was right on top of the command bunker. Somehow they got video of that. And that was like, whoa, WTF. We went home, took our money out of the bank because we didn't want to leave any of our money left for our relatives to fight over. And we spent every penny before we went to Vietnam. And so, we knew. And the Tet Offensive, they launched a lot. And of course, it was interesting because some of the media, particularly after Walter Cronkite came out and said there's no light at the end of the tunnel, he was like portrayed it in a negative way where every unit that had contact with the enemy, the Viet Cong, were eviscerated. They were never as effective as they were, again, for the rest of the war. But that part never got reported. But that was what's going on. And then by the time we got there, by the time I got to FOB-1, there was still some activity. They rocketed our base. We got mortared once in a while, but nothing like Lang Vay, where they would come in and attack the base head on.
Yeah, stories from Lang Vay are incredible.
Oh my gosh, yes.
When you first got on the ground, you talked about you were making your way around the country. You heard from a few SF guys, Special Forces guys, that an entire recon team at FOB 4 vanished in Laos, and that a Spike Team Alabama from FOB 1 lost all Americans but one, Sergeant John Allen. I think your book, it made it sound like this made it very real to you, but can you get into what that did to you as you're just getting into Vietnam, green as grass?
Yeah, I mean, on top of Allen and the recon team, there were like 2 recon teams in late March of '68 that we knew about. One was from FOB-4 and another was, I forget the name of the team, but John Gallagher had been I think it was the 1-0, and he died on the LZ. He let all the team members get out, And then he stayed on the ground because he took care of the team first. There was a couple other teams that we'd heard about. In addition to that, when we had gone through training group, we went through as commo guys, and we had to do Morse code. And there was a sergeant first class named Villarosa, and he was our trainer. And me, McIntyre, a few other guys, we got recycled for commo. And he brought us in on the weekends. At night, we would go back just to get us up to the mandatory word group per minute that you needed in order to graduate. And he did it. He got us through it. When we went through our top secret briefing, at the end of it, they said that we've had some bad cases. And then they asked, does anybody know Paul Villarosa? Well, me and Mac, we like, oh yeah, of course we know him. He was one of our heroes back in Fort Bragg. He said, well, he went out of FOB-4, the first new mission out of FOB-4 in Da Nang in early January, 68. He was KIA. And what they didn't tell us was, not only was he KIA, but they tortured him and they burned him with a flamethrower. And they kept one American alive who was wounded, kept him alive, and they knew we'd come to get him. And they kept him alive so he'd go back and tell everybody what happened. So that's one of our heroes that we heard about, in addition to all the teams that had been hit. And we knew by that time, like we had our first mission briefing in July for a training mission, and then we had another one in August. And each time they said, we've heard that the NVA are training sappers or teams that are just designed to find SOG teams in Laos and Cambodia and to kill the Americans but leave the indigenous troops alive. And then on August 23rd, 68, there was a sapper attack at FOB-4, and they killed 16 Green Berets in one night. It was a night, no moon, and they hit after midnight. They were in the camp, and it was the most severe loss of Green Berets in SF history. And fortunately, nobody's come close to that since then. So that was our introduction. That was all going on, and we knew we were up against a determined foe.
It's interesting to me that you knew how hardcore it was, you and everybody else there. And I wonder if there's some sort of commonality among yourself and all the other guys who fought in SOG. I know there's radically different backgrounds, different motivations, but do you see some sort of thread of similarity in the way that they approached the world and why they were still willing to lean into that unit and that combat?
Absolutely. I mean, to this day, anybody I meet, I judge to the men I served with, including Hep and Sal. I mean, they were just outstanding, and we knew what the mission was. And, my team was all South Vietnamese. There were 3 guys that were on the team. Their families came south in 1954, 1955, after Dien Bien Phu fell. They came south because they didn't want anything to do with communism. And they were all on recon, our team, Spike Team Idaho. They said we would rather live in South Vietnam. We know the government's corrupt. We can live with it. And when we have issues with this government, we work around it. And they were willing to die for it, as opposed to living under the communist thumb. And that's like, okay, man, we're in this thing together. And in the jungle, man, anybody that I served with on our team, we always deferred to them. They ran point, they ran tail security, and we just went with their innate skill set in the jungle, and try to keep up with them.
The King Bee pilots. So they're piloted, like we said, by the South Vietnamese guys. Can you talk about what lies at the root of that relationship? Because it doesn't seem like it would be patriotic. It doesn't seem like it would have that sort of value. There's some, I think, deeper brotherhood there that's maybe forged in the combat, in the hardship. But what do you think about that relationship?
Well, I'm alive today because thanks to the King Bee pilots and other aviators. But in my first 7 months running missions with Spike Team Idaho, there are so many times that our team was under contact. We were extracted under enemy fire each time. On October 7th, we had been in contact for 4 hours. And Captain Tin came in with the King Bee and hovered there in the elephant grass for 10 minutes until we got to it. And the bottom line, We were down to our last magazines, over 600 rounds, out of hand grenades, out of M79 rounds. He pulled us out. That King Bee had 48 bullet holes in it. And somehow none of our guys were wounded.
So did the entire recon team Idaho vanish, and that's how you ended up joining? Nobody knows what happened?
No, it was the two Americans, Glenn Lane, who was the team leader, and Robert Duval Owen was the assistant team member. Even his story, like a little quick sidebar, he had been to Vietnam previously. So in early May, he could have flown to Washington State from South Carolina, but he had to leave. He hitchhiked to Washington, sent his money home to his wife, goes to Vietnam because he had been in country before. He gets assigned to SOG, gets on our Spy Team Idaho, and within 20 days, from May 1st to May 20th or May 22nd, they get inserted, he disappears. He promised his daughter he'd be home for her birthday, but he never made it. And I'm still in contact with his daughter. But that's just one of those little sidebars. And so it was the two Americans and 4 or 5 indig that we lost. So we hired right away 3 South Vietnamese that were 15 years old. And Spider brought us together with Sal and Hep, and we trained up really hard. During June and July, we ran a couple night ambushes, a couple practice missions, and then we started doing a real thing.
Who on your team had combat experience since you were new?
Spider Parks and Hep and Sal. I mean, both of them had been, this is 68, they had both been running solid recon missions for over 2 years now.
Oh, rock. And did you say they were 15 years old?
Yeah, we hired 3 15-year-old kids. And by the end of the year, 2 of the 3 were really sharp. In fact, one son was so good, he began running point.
That's remarkable.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they were serious. And we had one other team member, Fook. So we had Hep, Sal, and Fook, who all had combat experience. And so Fook was the point man for our first few missions. Then we had Fook, Sal, Hep, myself, and Don Wolkin. And so we had those missions. And again, we just learned, grew together. They were the experts in the jungle. I always did the TAC air and all the commo. Through the Prick 25 FM radio, or an emergency, we had the ultra high year 10 for talking to the air crews and things like that. But they were great. I mean, our South Vietnamese were, and they were absolutely fearless. I mean, Sal and or Hep or Fook, they always initiated contact when the enemy was approaching us. We never got ambushed. We knew when they were coming for us, and we were very fortunate. We always somehow had high ground or had a tactical situation where we were able to work with TAC air or things like that to hold them back.
You're with these guys, like combat hardened South Vietnamese, 15-year-old Vietnamese, and it would just be you, maybe another 1 or 2 Americans, and a handful of these South Vietnamese in Cambodia or Laos, knowing full well that if you get caught, because Geneva Convention doesn't apply, you would never make it home.
When you're in, you can't talk about this to anybody. And they were serious. Like after my first book came out, Dad read the book. He goes, I always wonder why the guy came by and picked up our trash. And we used to have trash collection 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. And Dad saw this guy pick up the trash. My dad got a job at the post office. A couple years later, he saw the guy, and he worked with the FBI. And they were picking up our trash to make sure we didn't violate that NDA. That's how serious they were about it.
So you're out there, Cambodia, with these South Vietnamese partner forces, and I can't wrap my head around that tight-knit partnership you had, because I didn't see anything to that extent in our wars in the Middle East. Was it just the fact that you were surrounded out there completely on your own with hopefully some aircraft if you got into a troops in contact? Is that what enabled you to bond with these South Vietnamese partner force and basically become brothers with them?
We were all into the mission. And they knew that they were in a special mission with us, going across the fence. They got paid more than any other South Vietnamese military unit. So they had good pay. Like our first few missions, everything was with Sal, Fook, and Hep, because they were hardcore. And then as time went on, we ran missions bringing out some of the younger guys to see how they were. As time went on, we had a bunch of missions, so we always had plenty of opportunities. But we always had Hep and Sal, or Hep and Fook, because Hep was our interpreter. I'm alive again today thanks to them and, of course, the King Bees and our aviators that were American. When I first came onto the team, when Spider Parks introduced me to the team, Sal looked at Hep and he said quietly, he says, he's too tall, his feet are too big, and he looks stupid. This is like May, right? 68. After that mission, when we're on a helicopter, after Captain Tin pulled us out, I looked over at Sal. He gave me a little nod. As the first time he gave me a nod like that. So that was part of us building our bonding. And from that day on, we were tight. And Sal was a farmer. All he wanted to do was go back with his wife, get a little patch of land somewhere and plow up some rice. And he was just a cool guy. But man, he could smell the NVA before we did. He knew what they were doing. And he kept us alive on the ground.
I think this is probably your first major firefight, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
You had a prairie fire emergency, which means you're at risk of being overrun. And the comms guy's worst nightmare, you couldn't get anybody up on the radio. Your teammate said to you at one point, look, they're stacking up dead bodies against us to get to us. Can you pick up the mission from that point there?
Earlier in the day, we had moved all in the morning. In the afternoon, we went out of the jungle because we were trying to get to, the secondary mission was, we had heard there was an American POW camp in Laos, and we wanted to try and move in that direction. So at one point, we left the jungle to get to a trail that was right at the end of the jungle, and it was a steep drop-off. And we went up this trail for maybe an hour or so. And at one point, around 1:30 or so, I heard Sal, because I was back. Sal was the tail gunner. Fook was running point. Don Wolkin, Hep, Davison, who was the other American with us, myself, and Sal. And I hear Sal hissing. I turned around, and back way down this trail, we could see two NVA in full, not in uniform, but I think they had like black shirts and hats. And their AKs were at port arms. And I was stunned. And Sal was like, number 10. I wanted to throw an M79 round at him. He said, no. Let's keep moving. So we told Don, and we left the trail, went straight up a little knoll, and got on top of a knoll. And when we were in our perimeter up there, I was trying to make communications. No luck. Hep and Sal opened fire, and they kept coming up. So luckily, the knoll was small enough that they could only send so many people up at a time. So they come out, we blow them back in the jungle. A lot of times, I wouldn't even see who we were shooting at. You see the weapons first. And this went on for a while. And at some point, we had no comma yet. Don came by, and we had this little break sometimes, And that's when he said, look what they're doing. And I couldn't really see it. And he says, look, they're stacking up the bodies, because Hep showed him. And they were stacking up the bodies because they're going to climb on top of the dead bodies to shoot down, to get an angle to shoot down at us instead of us shooting down at them all the time. And that, I'll tell you, that got my undivided attention. And that's also an indicator of how serious they were.
I think at some point during that mission, you had a couple of napalm runs, right?
Oh, yeah. We used everything they had. Some of the first gun runs we had were, I think, A-1 Sky Raiders. So that's a single-engine aircraft developed at the end of World War II, used in the Korean War. And it was an aircraft, single engine, that carried tons of ordnance. They could carry the same amount of ordnance that a B-17 bomber could carry. And they carried bombs, CBU, napalm, weapons. They had everything from a minigun to 20 Mike. It would depend on what the configuration for each plane was. And so my first napalm run, Covey had left. Covey was our forward air controller. And the code name for that was Covey. And the Covey would be an Air Force pilot with a Green Beret Covey rider. And so when I talked to Covey, it would be to the rider. And the rider would always be a veteran SOG soldier, the Green Beret. Because that way they'd be familiar with what it was like to be on the ground. And in this case, it was Spider Parks. But Spider had to leave to go refuel. I'm talking directly to the SPAD pilot, directing him in for the napalm run. And I'll never forget it. He goes, "Now y'all put your heads down. It's crispy critter time." And he was right. It was the first time I ever smelled burnt human flesh. He brought it in that close, and it just took the oxygen to right out of our lungs. Tight, but right. And then they came back with CBU, gun runs. Then we had Scarface, which was the Marine Corps gunships that supported SOG throughout the entire 8-year Secret War. And then we had the judge and the executioner, who were flying with the muskets out of, they were down south at 2 Corps. And the muskets were with the 176th, the Marical Division. But they were good. The judge and the executioner came in, and then they all refueled and came back. So by the time Captain 10 came in, we had the muskets doing gun runs around us to suppress enemy fire because we were in elephant grass. And it took us almost 10 minutes just to go maybe 10, 15 yards. But it was elephant grass. It was just hard going. Like I fell down, Wolken ran over me. He fell down, I ran over him, but we pushed the grass down, getting to the king bee that was sitting there waiting for us.
You wrote at one point that once the NVA heard the propellers of the A-1Es, they started getting even closer, trying to negate the fire superiority of the bombs.
Besides the mission briefings, the clubhouse was where we learned a lot. And there were several senior NCOs, all of them experienced Green Berets. A couple had been in the Korean War. They knew about it. They called it. The NVA would get close to the bell. If they hear your helicopter gunships coming, or even a helicopter, they'll try to come and shoot the helicopters down, or an A-1 Sky Raider. They knew the difference. And they hated those Sky Raiders. And as much as they hated them, we loved them because they could bring it in really close. And they could stay on station for an hour, 2 hours sometimes, coming back, making repeated gun runs. And their tactical strength was they were always close to the treetops. And they were just amazing.
So that mission was wrapping up. He said Captain 10 came in, cool as a Rocky Mountain breeze. On the ride back, he said you were happy to be able to drink water because you were still alive to drink it. The King Bee had 48 holes in it, which you said earlier. And I'm just marveling at the Captain 10 being that cool, just hovering under fire, knowing what you were in the middle of, actively in the middle of. How does someone become that calm and that cool under what might be the worst case situation?
That's a $64,000 question. I mean, not only with the South Vietnamese aviators like Captain 10, Captain Tuong, I mean, these are all guys that came in at different time and pulled us out under fire. As part of that aviator ice in the blood thing, they're just amazing. I mean, even the Americans, they're the same way. All of our aviators, they were just fearless. And I never understood it because if you ever touched the controls of a helicopter to sit in the co-pilot seat and try to do it sometime, because, you know, the controls are so sensitive. Like you see the movies, we have airplanes, you have pilots, they get the stick and they're moving it and they're fighting it and all this. Not with a helicopter. You just barely touch that main stick in the front and it moves. Because the Captain Tuong used to let me fly in the co-pilot seat. So I knew how sensitive they were. I could almost take off in a King Bee, almost. But it was really delicate flying. But in answer to your question, I don't know. There's just something about them being able to focus on keeping that bird flying that somehow they were able to do it time after time.
So after that mission, you became 1-0, which means you took command of RT Idaho. And you had a part in the book that it made me stop and think. You said one team member decided to leave SOG at that point in time, and you spoke to him 32 years later. And he said that he had never been the same since that mission. Why do you think that some people have such radically different experiences from the same mission, the same contact? What are your thoughts on that?
It just comes down to the individual's individual strengths. I mean, Jim Davison, when he came on the team, he had a tour of duty with the 173rd first. So he was familiar with contact and, fighting the communists with the 173rd, which was a unit, a really highly respected unit in Vietnam. And he came to the team, and during that time we were on the ground, Jim was rock solid. He never quenched, he never yielded. He stayed right there, held his position time after time, between Hep and Sal. We never worried. So I always credit him. And he just knew it's an individual thing. He said, I've never seen anything like that. And I said, well, welcome to SOG. I didn't say it that way, but this is where our missions are. And he said, well, I can't do it. And I said, well, thanks for telling me. I'd rather have you tell me now than to be on a mission and have you break. Because 2 days before that mission, when we had our firefight, Lynn Black had his, where a 9-man team went in and came up against an NVA division of 10,000. One of the Americans, the SF guy, never fired a round in anger. He prayed and did a bunch of crazy stuff, but never fought. And somehow Lynn was able to survive all that. So we never had that problem with Idaho. And thanks to Jim, he got us through it. He fought through the battle. He just knew he couldn't do it. So it was a volunteer organization. So anybody that wanted out, they could leave anytime they wanted.
Let's roll with that example of 9 versus 10,000. I wasn't going to go the path of Lynn Black, but would you mind talking about that?
Are you kidding? This is during the 8-year Secret War, Lynn has got to be one of the top 3 to 5 SOG missions, which is just incredible. It started out, they had a mission, I think it was just an area recon. And they went in with 2 helicopters. And we had a brand new team leader. He was inexperienced. He had been in Europe with the 10th Group, but he hadn't been on the ground. But because he had more rank, the people in S3 or whoever made him the team leader. They pulled off the experienced team leader, sent him to another team. And on this day, October 5th, 1968, when the team got inserted, the 2nd helicopter had contact with the enemy. And they saw an NVA flag. Well, Lynn Black goes, Lynn had a tour with the 173rd. Beforehand, he and his brother had been with the 173rd. And so he knew that if you see an enemy flag, there's at least a battalion, which would be 3,000. He told the team there, look, this is not going to be good. We have 9, could be 3,000 NVA here. And the team leader refused. And then he walked them down a trail. Well, the golden rule with us, we never walked on trails. Some teams did, but our team never walked on a trail. We would cross a trail, photograph a trail, set up ambushes on the trail, but not walk down it. It's just an invitation for real trouble. Anyways, he walked them into an L-shaped ambush. As they're going down the hill, there's like an embankment up in the front and on the right. And he walked them into an ambush where he was killed instantly. The point man was killed instantly. A third was wounded. And they were in that firefight for a long time. Then they finally backed out. And then the NVA began doing wave attacks with them. And Lynn and his people began building a wall of condivers, dead NVA soldiers. And at some point, they all ran out of ammo with the CAR-15s. And they began taking AK-47s. Well, at one point, when Lynn had moved the team, he literally got hit with a concussion grenade that destroyed his CAR-15, knocked him unconscious, and with burns and some other tore his pants. And Cowboy and the team members were literally kicking Lynn, kicking him and pouring water in his face to wake him up because he was doing all the radio comms at the time. And they woke him up, got him back on his feet, and they continued on for the rest of the day. And they finally, at the end, after an all-day engagement, numerous airstrikes, fast movers, SPADs, they lost 2 King Bees that were shot down there. They had 1 Jolly Green Giant that was shot down next to the LZ. And then ultimately, a Jolly Green Giant came in and hovered he came into a wooded section chopped the trees down, just literally hovered there when Lynn took the remaining 6 back to the helicopter. And they lifted off. As lifting off, they had these RPG rounds hitting the bomb, just lifting it up, and it flew over 1 or 2 mountains, and it had to do an emergency landing because it couldn't fly anymore. They sent out some air assets to pick up the remainder of the team, but they didn't have enough for Lynn and the 1-1. And so a Cobra came in. And you know, with the Cobra gunships, they have those doors on the left side that fold down to the gun racks and everything. Well, there's an area there with seat belts or safety belts, and you strap yourself in. Well, Lynn and the 1-1 flew back to Da Nang from Laos strapped to those things, froze their balls off because they're going up at 5,000 feet after being on the ground sweating all day. 20-some years later, America went back to try to find the 1-0, the team leader. And Lynn had helped them. He got a phone call from an NVA officer who was now an NVA general, high-ranking. And he introduced himself as, I was the colonel that ambushed your team. And he said, and they talked, and Lynn couldn't believe he's talking to the guy that ambushed him on October 5th. They're back and forth. And then at one point, Lynn goes, it was a bad day. We lost 3 men. And then the general goes, well, it was a bad day for us because, between you and TAC Air, you inflicted 90% casualties on us. Lynn goes, well, we saw the flag. That's a battalion. He goes, no. That was an NVA division. We had 10,000 men there. You inflicted 90% casualties on us. They talked a little bit further. And then the general goes, hey, who was the radio operator? And Lynn goes, well, that was me. He goes, yeah, you're the only guy that didn't go to the ground when we opened fire on your team. He goes, yeah, that was me. I was just stood there shooting the change magazines. And when I interviewed him, I remember him saying, sometimes I shoot a guy, I'd spin him around, I'd just shoot him a second time before he'd go down. So the general's talking to Lynn. He says, so you're the radio operator? He said, yeah, you shot me 3 times. He said, the worst thing about it, I was lying on the ground watching you kill my men, and I could do nothing about it. So you shot me 3 times. That's one of my favorite lines. But that was Lynn Black, October 5th, 1968. And that was one of our historic missions. He got out, 5 other team members. They lost 3.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And they, again, a hat off to, there was a time and again where they were right up against several wave attacks. One time an A-1 Sky Raider came in, flown by Captain Don Deneen or Lieutenant Don Deneen. It was so close that Lynn and them, they had all kinds of debris, tree branches, stuff like this from the gun runs. And then at one point, another time, one of the judge came in with his helicopter and hovered in front of the team as there was a wave attack coming at him and mowed down that wave attack and then left. He couldn't land, but that was just some of the heroics in the Jolly Green. And that's where we heard for the first time what the Jolly Green Giant motto is, that others may live. And that day, they lost 1 helicopter, 2 KIAs there, as well as other, I think there was a total of 19 casualties that day. If you include the King Bee pilots and the other aircraft that were shot down or people wounded during that battle.
You said at one point they used concussion grenades. Why did they not use shrapnel grenades?
Good question. The Chi-Com grenades that they had were not as good as our American grenades. And the concussion ones, thankfully it wasn't a concussion. If it had been a shrapnel, I think Lynn may have been KIA. Because there are times when the grenades didn't work. We had a time where Lynn and I got inserted and we were moving in the jungle and we had like a little rise above us and we were going to go around this rise. Fook was running point. I was behind Fook, number 2 in line, and Lynn was back. He's number 4 or 5. I forget where in the back. But as Fook was walking, he's a little bit more ahead of me. The vegetation was not as thick as it usually was. And I could see one of those grenades come down from top of that little rise. It came down. I yelled grenade. And I tried to get the fuck to pull him back, and the grenade went off. And, but it wasn't, if that had been an American grenade, fuck would have been dead. As it turned out, he was stunned, but no wounds. So that's, getting back to your question, I think their hand grenades just weren't as good as ours were in 1968.
You wrote about another mission in Target Echo 8 operation. Actually, this was in John L. Plaster's book. It was about you in Plaster's book. You had NVA on your trail, and they had tracker dogs with them. And at one point in the mission, you heard a toe popper, which was kind of a stay-behind bomb, explode behind you. You heard diesel trucks with the backs coming down, and then dogs, which is almost like the worst-case scenario. Can you...
Oh, yeah.
And then how you ended up getting out of that pickle?
We had a couple days where in the morning, we would go out with a team, get shot out at the primary, secondary, and the alternate LZs, go back, have lunch, give you a new target folder, say, here, because they wanted to get a team on the ground. So we'd go out, same thing. And so this had happened on and off. And one morning we'd go out, get shot off, come back, have lunch. I rotated some of the team members around because just the idea of flying out, having that brief contact, and then the flight back, it wears on you after a while. And so in this case, we got inserted into a part of the jungle where the Laotians had formerly done some slash and burn agriculture. So it wasn't thick jungle. And we got the team, and we just moved up the hill. Normally, when we were on the ground in thick vegetation, we would move 10 minutes and wait 10. Well, here, because we got inserted and we had this open area, I pushed the team. We went up that hill and never took a break. Maybe had one break along the way where I would talk with my assistant team leader, John Bubba Shore. We came to a major road. We crossed the road. They had telephone wires. We had set up a wiretap, and then we set up an ambush on the road. And we had developed an ambush where you had plastic explosive in the center of the ambush. It would be 6 feet from the trail, and there'd be enough C4 that it would knock out that person. And then on the other side of each would be claymores that would kill everybody else. And we practiced that time and time again, inserting it. And so you put in the plastic explosive, have claymores on flank security, and 1 or 2 in the back. And our back was up against the hill. So Sal was monitoring the wiretap, and Spider finally came out for a commo check. And so me and Bubba are like, the NVA are walking up and down this trail. They got their AKs on their shoulders. One guy was an officer with his pistol, but they didn't know we were there. And we had gone so far, so fast, they just didn't realize that we were there. So Spider comes in, I gave him the code, says, hey, in 1 hour, I'll be back to the primary LZ. I'll have a POW. I gave him the code for a POW. And then Spider just told us, hey, I'm at 10,000 feet. I can't see the mountain you're on. Well, the pucker factor tightened up real fast. And right about then, up the mountain from us, we could hear some tanks starting up. And then on the road, now all of a sudden the NVA are on the road. They're running past. They got their weapons, and they're going different directions. And so we pulled the wiretap down, pulled in the ambush. We moved out and then moved away from where we had been. And we moved until dark. And when dark came, we came to a little stream bed because now Sal climbed a tree and we could hear the dogs. And there was, I don't know how many, there were too many. And he said, buku dogs, maybe over 100 people with lanterns. So we got into the stream and it wasn't really deep. And we went up it for an hour or so in the dark. And we finally came, and at one point, I had the guys going out. So if the dogs came, they'd follow the false trails. Then we put down pepper, and we had the powdered mace and put that out. And then at some point, we finally broke and we went up the bank. And it was like in the bank, maybe 10, 12, 14 feet up. And we set up the RLN for the night, rest overnight. So at that time, we had 8 men on the team. I was facing the creek or this little stream, whatever it was there. About midnight, 1 o'clock, two NVA walked past with a lantern, and they went past us, and the lantern ran out of fuel. They turned around and came back. We're going down the stream, and they passed me. Hep coughed, and so that guy, the NVA, came up the hill towards me, and I'm sitting there with my feet spread in my car 15. I'm assuming he could hear my heart, but he came up, and only when the wind moved, he came up, and when the wind moved, I hear him move. He finally got close enough where he touched my boot, and I heard him catch his breath. But he was cool. He waited. When the wind blew, he backed up, finally got down to the stream. He and his buddy went that away. At first light, we were out of there, and we went up to the top of the mountain. It took us all day. We got up to the mountaintop, set up that night, and that night we had a Russian resupply in Laos. It was just the weirdest damn thing, because here we are on a mountaintop. It's dark, and 2 or 3 mountains over, the whole side of the mountain lit up with lights. And we could hear the Russians on the radio. We got them, but I couldn't get any attack air or anything. They came in, they did their resupply and left. So we knew the Ivan and the boys were there. So that was that mission. And we stayed there for like 2 or 3 more days. Sal and the Son had run into some woodcutters, but the woodcutters were just civilians. They saw Sal and they didn't say anything. They went their way, and Sal came back to our RON. And then we got pulled out. We got pulled out under heavy enemy fire. It was the first time we had an American come pick us up, because this was November, and all of our transportation had been King Beach. So this time, it was 101st Airborne, and when the ship came in, I told Bubba, you go out and tell them we got Vietnamese. So Bubba was the first one out. We took half the team. The second helicopter came in, and then Henry King was the other team member for that mission. Henry went out first. Then the Vietnamese, Sal and Hep, went with him. And then I was the last one on the last bird. We were always the first one out, last one on for team leader. Left under heavy enemy fire. And Scarface got shot up really bad. And they had 2 gunships. One was flown by a lieutenant colonel. And his plexiglass got shot out. And that night we get back to the bar, and he's like cussing up a storm. And I said, I'm sorry about your helicopter. He said, you guys, every time I go in, my helicopters get shot up. It's hard to get them fixed. He's just bitching him. I bought him several rounds, and still kept groaning. And I said, look, Colonel, I'm sorry. Does that mean it was Lieutenant Colonel Robinson? So I'm sorry, sir. Does that mean the next time you're not going to come? He said, no, we didn't say that. Scarface always came for us when we needed him.
Why did the NVA tracker get so close to you that he could touch your boot? I get why you didn't kill him, but why didn't he try to kill you or raise the alarm?
I'm not sure. That's a $64,000 question. I think they knew they were by themselves, and maybe he didn't want to die right away.
Yeah.
Because I know I'm not sure if he was the one that was carrying a lantern. Because those teams, sometimes when they have, maybe, again, I'm not speaking from experience, because tonight you just can't see them. But we had lanterns before it get close to us, and that was really close. And I could see them, but I just forget, because after what happened afterwards, I forgot everything that happened before. We could see them when they walked past, And I thought the other team members saw them, but nobody else saw them but me.
You wrote at one point, I'm going to quote you, I had heard tiny droplets of morning dew landing on the leaves above us. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have heard a freight train roll past me. Now dewdrops were my wake-up call, end quote. And that you perfectly encapsulated the sensory experience of being in a combat environment. I wondered, with how intense your tours were, did you ever try to replicate that sort of extrasensory awareness? Were you able to replicate it? Did you want to?
No, never per se. I was just amazed, because we had a couple other missions, but that one mission on October 6th, that was the one we were up all night. We took turns, and at one point during the night, it was my turn, and I heard something moving, because When we set up our RON that night on October the 6th, there had been a tracker that got really close to us. He fired one round from his SKS. And so we were hypersensitive. And around 2:00, I could hear some movement. And at one point I heard movement right in front of the Claymore that we had out. So I whispered in Don's ear, I said, "Hey, we got something in front of the Claymore. Can I blow it?" And he said, "No." I thought he said, "Go." So it's 2:00 in the morning. I blow off this Claymore. Hep and Sal were pissed. Don was pissed. But whatever was in front of that Claymore, it went away. And that was part of that mission. So I was asleep when first light came. And that was when I had that. I will never forget it. I wondered what that noise is. It sounded like a noise, but that sensory amplification, in my mind, it was the dewdrops. And that's what I could hear. And that's what woke me up. And that happened time after time when we'd be on the ground for nights when there'd be moisture coming down through the jungle.
One thing that strikes me when I listen to your SOGcast podcast or read the books about SOG is the willingness to accept casualties on the American side. If in Afghanistan or Iraq, a platoon disappeared, there would be a complete overhaul of tactics. What happened? What went wrong? But in the Vietnam War, it seemed like a grinder. It was just full speed ahead, no matter what. We're not letting up. I don't even know how to phrase it as a question, but what did that experience feel like? Like, how did it hit you to know that recon teams would vanish and never be seen again, and just still have to go out there on missions voluntarily because you were a volunteer the entire time? What was that experience like?
Well, no, we grew up watching World War II and Korean War movies. So we had a sense of people like Audie Murphy, Sergeant York, and wartime stories where Americans would stand tall for the right cause. We knew we were the tip of the spear at that point for our government and for those missions, the top secret missions, having gone through all the background and everything checks. So it was a big deal. We knew that we were special, although we didn't talk about it that much. So regardless of what they threw at us, we had to continue on with the mission one way or the other, try to figure out ways to improve the time on the ground, to improve our odds. What could we do? I mean, some guys like Dick Thompson, they got to the point where they would not eat American food 3 days before a mission. And they would not shower or shave. They wanted regular body odors. And so that the regular body odors would smell like anything else. Whereas me, I wasn't bright enough like Dick. I was still eating lerps and things like that on the mission. And there was a couple of times where we'd been training hard. I would take a shower, and then the next day in the jungle, now on afterthought, I think, well, that's pretty stupid. But back then, we just didn't know any better. But that was part of that. We're here. This is what the odds are against us. How can we further the mission? And let's keep going. God and country first and foremost, you know?
So you were 1-0. That is the cream of the crop. That's the God mode in SOG. That means you were the leader of a team out there with complete autonomy. Did you have, or do you have now, like, principles of leadership that you exercised while you were boots on the ground that you tried to live up to and tried to embody?
Well, I learned from Spider Parks and Pat Watkins, our senior NCOs, first and foremost, and watched them not to be a rigid military guy, particularly with special forces, because we work with we call them the little people, but it's a term of affection. We would work with them, but also we get to know them on a personal basis. Like when Lynn was with the with the 173rd, and a couple of other guys were with traditional American units, they wouldn't get to know guys because they would lose them maybe. They didn't want to have a friendship to go through that terrible experience. Whereas with us on a team, we got to know each other, and then any Americans that we lost, that was part of the unfortunate part of the game. I mean, Sam, today we're talking in Southeast Asia from the Vietnam War, there's 1,573 Americans who are still listed as missing in action. Out of that, you've got 98 Green Berets that are still listed as missing in action. So we have, out of that 98, 58 are from SOG. Those are recon guys. That includes Lane and Owen from Idaho. These are Green Berets that we're never going to see again or hear from. Their families will never hear anything. The 5th Special Forces Group is putting together a 5th Special Forces Group War Memorial at 5th Special Forces at Fort Campbell. There's almost 800 Green Berets that are going to be on that list. So yeah, it's a big number, and it hurt, but we had to go on because we knew that if those guys were there with us, they would urge us to go on, try to improve the battle, try to get a leg up on the NVA anytime we could.
Who was your greatest mentor, and how did he help you grow?
Well, Spider Parks, first and foremost. I mean, those first couple of weeks, I did so many things so wrong. And he was like a big brother, more than a team leader. He only raised his voice at me maybe once or twice. And it was only when I did something really stupid as opposed to just being regularly stupid. And then later on, when I became the 1-0 and talking with Sal through HEP about the mission prep, after action, about the men, try to take care of them any way we could. Everything from not necessarily Sal, but some of our younger guys. It could be anything from getting their VD taken care of to giving them weekend passes, whatever, But you come together as a team, and over time, you had that bond there.
If you had to boil it down, what are 1 or 2 attributes of your SOG teammates that you most admired?
Just the absolute sense of resolve to do the mission, even though we were up against, and we knew we were up against harsh odds. But we had TAC Air, we had our King Bees, and we really thought we could make a difference. We tried our own way. The leadership thing was we never have a team member do something you wouldn't do. So the whole thing about leading from the front. In my case, I wouldn't lead from the front because I was too big to be the point man. So, and my Vietnamese were better. So, but to listen to them and just to watch the way they would interact with their people, you take care of them. Once in a while, you got to crack the whip a little bit as the team leader. But when you did it, you would explain why. Now on missions, once we were on the ground, the job was the mission. I mean, sometimes you wouldn't talk for 2 or 3 days. And it would be strictly hand signals, set up the RON, who's going to take watch. And then Sal would take care of that because he would tell everybody when, and if Sal wasn't there, it'd be Fuck or HEP. And all of that stuff was just prioritized. And all that training just panned out. And went through thousands of rounds on the range. So whenever we made contact, you weren't worried about your weapon other than keeping it clean. And you had muscle training. So if you're in the middle of a firefight, you're doing things as quick as you can to change the magazine or whatever it took. Use the M79 round, grenades, and of course, TAC Air. Used it to its best advantage. Try to lead from the front. Never ask people to do things you wouldn't do. And again, I was very impressed with Spire because when we were on the ground, the team was so smooth because we had worked so hard on the range at night, did the night ambushes and all that kind of stuff,
We talked about Lynn Black. Do you have another mission that's kind of famous in the SOG world that you think is worth talking about?
Well, there's one that's more fun than anything. With Lynn and the Frenchman, Doug Letourneau, they had been in a target area, and they were up there, and after the second day, they could hear activity in the jungle, and they thought it was Pathet Lao, because the Pathet Lao were not as good as the NVA. So Pathet Lao was the Laotian equivalent of the Viet Cong, but they weren't trained as well as the Viet Cong, and certainly not as well as the NVA. So the second and third day, they moved, they could hear this activity. So finally, like on the 4th day, Lynn said he had enough. He put the team online, and they could hear the movement coming towards them. And they figured they had the hand grenade pins are pulled, CAR-15s on full automatic, and it was orangutans. A flock or group of orangutans had been following the team. After they got done breathing a sigh of relief, meaning the orangutans had never seen white guys before, let alone Laotian orangutans ever seen in South Vietnamese. So at one point, Lin was there and he scratched his armpit, and the orangutan scratched his armpit. And so whatever Lin did, the orangutan did. So at one point, Lin flipped him the bird, and the orangutan flipped him the bird back. But that's one of my favorite, that's another Lin Black story. And then on another occasion, the team he and Doug were on a mission in Laos, and they were near a ridgeline. And Doug had somebody come up on the radio with a Spanish accent and said, "RT Idaho, we know where you are, and we're going to come and get you." And Doug was going, "Well, who is this?" Because it wasn't a combo check. He thought maybe at first was Covey coming for a combo check, but the guy had a Spanish accent. Well, Lin turns to Doug and goes, "WTF?" And Doug goes, "I don't know, this guy's talking to me. He says he knows where we are." So Lin gets on the phone with a guy. He was a Cuban. And the guy says, "We know where you are. We're going to come get you." And Lin goes, "I got your coordinates." So he read off the 6 digits. And Lin goes, "No, let me give you the 8-digit coordinates. Come and get us, motherfucker." Oh, he said, "By the way, your mother was a piss poor prostitute, because if she was any good, you would have had a better job instead of landing in Laos." The guy never came for him.
Unbelievable.
Oh, yeah. Lin was amazing.
Coming up to the SOGcast, you have a podcast where you interview people who are in SOG or who are tangential to SOG, air crew pilots. What has that meant to you, I guess, personally? Like, how has that deepened your tie with the community? What have you learned new from it?
Well, I learned a lot. Again, SOGcast happened and is funded completely by my favorite Navy SEAL, Jocko Willink. As you know, I've had the honor of being interviewed by Jocko 8 times. And during the 7th and 8th interviews, he kept talking about, let's do a thing called SOGcast, where we'll do more SOG interviews. So the very last interview that I did with Jocko was with a King Bee pilot, Captain On, who was one of these amazing King Bee pilots. At one point, he lost both hands after a helicopter crash, but he had saved other teams. He saved Lin Black, and he may have saved us once or twice, because sometimes we get pulled out, dropped off at the launch site. We wouldn't even have a chance to interact with the air crews. At the end of it, On leaves and Jocko goes, "Okay, let's get this SOGcast going." I said, "Great." I said, "I'll get you some Green Berets. We'll get some fact pilots in here." He goes, No. You're going to interview him." I go, "Me?" I said, "Jocko, with your skill, your talent, and your money, we could do this." He goes, "Okay." I just realized I just bit off a little bit more than I could chew. So he and Echo and I, we worked it out. And every SOGcast, all the expenses, flying people to my house in Tennessee for the interviews, aircraft, hotel reservations, meals, or if they drive out, he'll pay for it. He's covered all of those costs. And we've got 52 posted now. They go up first on Spotify and Apple as audios, and then later they're posted as YouTube. So we've got 52 now up on Spotify and Apple, and number 29 just went up on YouTube. 27 and 28 were with Lin Black. We went into that mission further there. So in answer to your question is, for me, it's really been fascinating. We've interviewed John Mullins, who spent time with the Operation Phoenix, the Phoenix Project. And he was one of the only guy we've interviewed who could talk about it. And Phoenix was the great program. We really heard the Viet Cong infrastructure. And John had several tours of duty there. And we talked to the one King Bee pilot, 2 King Bee pilots now, and Covey riders, and of course, fellow SOG guys, Dick Thompson, Pat Watkins, Spider Parks. He's just so damn humble. You know, I couldn't get him to go far, but we talked about the basics, and we had an hour-plus interview with Spider. And that, of course, is one of my favorites, because he's just my big brother. Also my 1-0. But if I stepped out of line, man, the sergeant major hat would go on, and I'd hear about it right away in clear, on very certain terms.
I've listened to probably 45 of them, and I'm about to finish up the rest. So I couldn't enjoy it as well as your book, Across the Fence. We'll do the last few questions here. You've been through a lot. You're still getting after it. What do you do to kind of prime yourself for the day, for podcasting, for writing, for everything you do?
We live in Tennessee now. We have 5 acres. We love it here. We love the people. And so there's a lot of work with the land. We got some families nearby. And those are the top priorities. And then the Sogcast, we try to pull them together whenever we can. And I get them over to Echo. Echo puts it up online. And it's just been a wonderful relationship. When I'm long gone, pushing up daisies in the wilderness somewhere, that people will turn to those with a sense of appreciation for hearing honest people talk about the missions on the ground.
What about 1 or 2 or maybe 3 books that have changed your life?
The Green Beret by Robin Moore. I mean, holy smoke. Reading that book, it just changed my whole attitude. And I figured I would like to think I could fit in with them. And even when I graduated, it's like, I just stood there going, holy shit, I'm a real Green Beret now. I can't believe it, you know? I kept waiting for somebody to say, wake up from your dream, knucklehead. A book called Bodyguard of Lies, which was the first major book about the World War II encryption, with the encryption devices that were top secret. And there was like scenes that he portrayed, including Winston Churchill, realizing that the Germans were going to bomb the town of Coventry. And so there were people it was the Enigma project. So the Enigma staff had broken the code, and they came and said, look, we got to tell people of Coventry. And Winston Churchill said, no, because if we tell the people of Coventry, there's German agents there, and they'll all want to know what led to us warning the people about the raid. And the Bodyguard of Lies has had phenomenal details on the Enigma, the early days, how they broke the code, and what its impact was, helping find the German submarines, and et cetera. Amazing book.
All right. How can people follow you? How can they get your book? How can they follow the Sogcast?
All the books are up on Amazon. Just punch in John Stryker Meyer or Across the Fence. It should pop. And I have a website, SOGchronicles.com. All the books are there. We have listings for all of our MIAs. And most of the podcasts are there.
All right. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time. I really do. I appreciate everything you've done, your service, and everything else.
Well, thank you, Sam. Keep up the good work there and your other projects that we talked about before we turned on the microphone. Keep up the good work. God bless you, sir.
Likewise. Thank you.
You're born.
That's it for this episode. If you want to check out more from the podcast, head to zeroeyes.com/Nobel, where you can see show notes, read more about our guests, and suggest guests or topics of your own. Until next time, stay in the fight. Don't ring the bell.